Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to this discussion on audit. So we have been discussing about risk assessment and internal control. In the last couple of sessions, we have discussed various aspects as around risk assessment. We also started discussion around the internal control in the previous session. So today we plan to continue. Okay, and in terms of the flow, I'll just do a quick recap so that everyone is aware in terms of how this flow has been really moving. So we talked about risk assessment, that as far as audit is concerned, risk assessment is a very critical process. Now, as around this risk assessment, we discussed what are the ways through which this risk can be assessed. We also discussed about the procedures using which this assessment identification of risk can be done. Okay, and therein we also discussed that understanding the entity, the environment in which the entity operates, and of course the internal control system which the entity has in place. This really helps the auditor. In terms of what? In terms of planning the overall course of audit, in terms of designing various audit procedures. Okay, so now as around understanding the entity, understanding the environment, we talked about a lot of points in the previous session. We also discussed about internal control, means what is the meaning of internal control, how this is defined, what are the various reasons because of which its understanding becomes critical to the audit planning, critical to the overall audit process. Okay, now we'll do a further deep dive on this internal control. So we are just going to continue on this internal control part. Yeah, something that we started with in the previous session. So we are going to continue on that. Now, can you just quickly help me understand what is the meaning of internal control before we move further on this? Yeah, quickly, if you can just let me know your understanding of internal control. We also discussed about the technical definition of internal control. We also discussed that there are few points which this internal control takes care of. So it will be good to understand from you. Yeah, quickly, if you can just give me your understanding of internal control. Yes. I'll just move to the presentation. In the meantime, you can just start sharing your responses. Okay, so we are talking about internal control. Yeah. All right, so Palvi says activities which are controlled by the management. Great. Ajay Surya says internal checking in respect of various plans of the management. Okay, Dipali says identification and evaluating risk. Okay, then Ranjit Ranju says safeguarding of interest. Hardik says control system set up by the management for efficiency, effectiveness of operations, safeguarding of assets, reliability of financial reporting, compliance of laws and regulations. Very good, because I think Hardik has covered all the pointers which are really relevant in respect of the internal control. Yes or no? Yeah. All right. So I can see a lot of responses coming in, but I have missed out on some of them. Yeah. So hopefully you have revised. Okay. One thing which I keep repeating in every session, and I will just request everyone to just make sure that you follow that whatever we have been discussing, just make sure that you're revising it, because all of these things are interconnected. So if you revise, that will help you in terms of establishing all of those linkages. Okay. So now moving further on to this internal control. Now, for an auditor, this detailed, or you can say deep understanding of internal control system of the organization is important. That is something we already know. That is something we understand. We understand how this is going to benefit the audit. Okay. Now, there comes a question that as far as internal control is concerned, we have looked at the definition, we have looked at some of the pointers around it, means what is the meaning of internal control. We have also looked at various examples around internal control. But what do you mean by deep understanding? What all other points, what all other aspects one needs to take care of when the internal control is being discussed? Okay, so that is something we'll just try to cover in more detail today. We can just say that there are 5 components into which this internal control can be segregated, or you can say there are 5 ways through which this detailed understanding of internal control can be obtained. Okay, something which you can see over the screen right now. Now, what are those points? Control environment, risk assessment process of the entity, information system and the communication in respect of the entity, control activities, monitoring of controls. Okay, so these are the 5 things that we have in place as around the internal control, which are required to be looked at in more detail. Okay, so now what we will do is we'll just try to get into each and every pointer, and we'll try to understand each of these points one by one with the help of some examples. Okay, so we'll just try to pick up some of the examples around it. Just a minute, sorry, I think just took away the presentation. Okay, so now first, let's talk about the control environment. Now, what do you mean by control environment? Control environment, you can say, talks about various processes, various activities, various aspects of the entity. Means within the entity, if there is anything which the management or the top management wants to convey to the overall organization, to the employees, in respect of the ethics. Now, if you remember, ethics we discussed is very, very important. Huh? Now, what do you mean by ethics? Integrity. It was all about having that internal assessment or having that thought process, or you can say an approach wherein honesty is followed in respect of carrying out a lot of activities. Now, if this culture is being followed in the organization, how will the management ensure that? For the organization to follow such culture wherein the people are being in where the people are honest in terms of activities they are required to do. Okay, they follow ethics. That is only possible when the organization has a clear-cut laid out objective in respect of such ethics. So there has to be a proper communication around it. So what do you mean by communication? It means the policies of the organization, the objective of the organization should speak about it. And the organization should also take care about its enforcement within the organization. There has to be a level of commitment which needs to be demonstrated by the employees in respect of competence, because this will lead to quality. This will lead to quality in respect of the work which is being done by various persons. When we talk about anything in relation to any system, whether that system is good or bad, it can only become possible when the leadership, or you can say the top management, is really bothered about. Okay, so whatever the top leadership will think about, that is something which flows within the organization. So that's why participation by those charged with governance becomes important. Can you tell me What is this? Those charged with governance. Quickly, we talked about it. What is this goal? Those charged with governance. Hardik says management. Vaishnavi says directors. Quickly, quickly. Those charged with governance. What does it mean? What does it include? I can see a lot of responses coming in. Yeah. So let's understand this once again. It means the board of directors. Okay. Or you can say audit committee. Of course, wherever it is applicable. Yeah. So that's why we are talking about the top management in a way or the leadership in a way. Understood? So whenever they will be participative, they will be involved. So this message will pass on to everyone in a proper manner. The structure of the organization, the philosophy which they follow, okay, the authority metrics which they follow. Authority metrics means the clear-cut laid out system which the entity has in place. In respect of what? So let's suppose if A is required to do something and B will become the checker of whatever A will do. So in a way, what has been done? So there is a delegation matrix. There's also an authority matrix. What do you mean by that authority matrix? Means everything which A will do will be checked by B. So no, yeah. Similarly, because we are talking about a culture, the policies and procedures, it's all about the overall environment of the organization. That's why the role of HR means human resource department, becomes extremely important. Why? Because they are the one who will bring out various policies and procedures in respect of the conduct of the employees, in respect of various activities which the employees will follow. Yeah. So that's why all of these things become extremely important. All of these things play a very, very important role as far as the overall environment of the organization is concerned. Now, before I really get on to some of the examples, can you just think of any example around some of these points that we have discussed? Or maybe you can just help me with some examples with the help of which management can convey, or you can say that the control environment, or you can say the overall environment in the organization could be one wherein the controls are strong, wherein the controls or the focus of the management is very, very clear in terms of how this needs to be implemented. Quickly, over to you. Any examples that come to your mind? Let me just see who can answer this. Over to you. Very good. There comes this response from Pranav, and this is very, very relevant. He says, so the recruitment methodology of the HR team, of course, yes, because if the HR will be very, very clear what type of employees are required to be recruited, what is the level, what is the competence level, are those persons carrying good ethics. So all of these things should form part of the recruitment process. So if that process is strong, then what will happen? Of course, at first level, this filtration has been done as regards the persons who are going to be employed. Very good. Okay. Then I think this next response comes from Ritika. Ritika says, sir, one work done passes with 2-3 personnel so that there's no chance of fraudulent activities. Again, I would say very, very relevant. Very, very relevant. Why? Because if there will be a concept of maker and checker, maker and checker. So in a way, in the organization, what is it that we are trying to establish? We are trying to establish the culture, and the employees will also be aware that whatever they are doing is subject to reviews, is subject to checking. Yes or no? Then this next response comes from Shatakshi. She says, approach of management while selecting accounting policies or anything related to financial reporting. Yes, we can say that. Why? Because this will also demonstrate whether the management is clear, competent, they have the adequate knowledge in terms of the selection of the accounting policies or not, and in terms of the financial reporting which they want to follow, as to what is their approach, how they want to go about it. Correct? One more example. I think something with which everyone can relate to. See, many a times, what do you see that in the organization, okay, of course, you would have also observed this maybe in organizations wherein you are just, maybe not working, but you may have studied. An email communication is given. So let's suppose if you go join a course, so what will happen? Day one, you will be given a policy document or a manual that these are our terms and conditions. This is something which you need to follow. Yeah. So of course, for example, you are currently taking these sessions. Yeah. So for taking these sessions, there must be some policies and procedures which you are required to follow, which you are subject to. Yes or no? Yeah. So why are all of these things important? Because in a way, all of these activities can therefore be controlled. Why? Because that's a design of control. That's a design of control which has been prepared by the management, or you can say the organization or the employees or those charged with governance. And through the communication, whether it's verbal or emails, this has also been communicated to the employees. Understood? Understood? Yeah. Then Pallavi says, sir, can we also include training schemes? Of course, yes. That will also demonstrate as to what is the focus of the company in terms of the skill set, or you can say upgradation of the employees. Yeah, because we are not only talking about ethics, we are basically talking about a system to be put in place so that each and every activity which is performed is carried out in an appropriate manner. Yeah. Clear on this? Yeah. Any questions on this? Any doubts? Clear? Vaishnavi is asking, sir, can we include performance review? Yes, of course. Yes, of course, we can include that. That will again be a relevant one. See, over here, we are talking about environment of the organization. Okay. And in respect of the environment of the organization, we need to find ways, we need to just look at the aspects through which control can be established, or you can say good systems can be put in place so that things can work in an appropriate manner. Appropriate manner means what? Means something which the organization requires, something which the organization desires to achieve, means something which is aligned with the objectives of the organization. Okay, so that's the thought process with which this is required to be looked at. Yeah, everyone clear on this? Any questions if you have? Everyone clear? Quickly, please confirm. Yes, quickly, huh? Okay, great. So now there's another part of this control. Okay, and we are talking about the control system. Huh? Please remember, we are talking about the internal control system. Okay. Now, in relation to the internal control system, what is it that we are trying to achieve? We are trying to look at the controls which the management will put in place, or you can say which the organization should have. But when can the controls be established? Do you think it is possible for the organization to put the controls in place without even knowing the risks which are involved, without even checking as to what can go wrong? Quickly, huh? Do you think that is possible? Hardik says no. No, sorry. Anirudh says no. Yeah. Aisha says no. Great. All right. So now, if we have to understand the control system, then this understanding of the risk assessment process. Now, please remember, we are talking about risk assessment process of the entity. So we are not talking about the auditor right now. Auditor will also identify the risk, but we are currently talking about identification and assessment of risks by the management. Why is that important? Because till the time the risks are not identified, till the time it is not understood as around the significance of the risks, the chances of their occurrence of what? Risk means chances of what can go wrong. Yeah. And on the basis of the risks which are looked at, which are identified, deciding what actions need to be taken, we cannot really get on to the controls, because control is what? Control is a consequence, or you can say something which will arise only in relation to the risk. If the organization will not have any risk, what's the need to have a control in place? Tell me. Tell me. If the organization will not have a risk, is there any need to put a control in place? Tell me. What do you think? Quickly. No. No. Yeah. Great. So Tambeshwari says no. Yes. That's why, as around the internal control, understanding of risk assessment process of the organization is also required. Okay. Now, when it comes to the organization, so we are talking about the environment of the organization. Yes or no? We are talking about this overall organization in a way. Now, as around this overall organization, as around the overall environment of the organization, let's try to understand as to what is really involved in that. We can say various systems, including the information system, will be included in that. Various business processes will be included in that. For example, marketing process, for example, payroll process. Yeah. All of these things which are relevant to financial report. Yes or no? So that's why if we have to understand the internal control system, understanding of all of those processes becomes important. And this is something which we have already discussed quite a lot. Yeah. So what do you need to understand? You need to understand the flow, those processes, flow of transactions. Yeah. You need to understand the transactions within that particular process. Who is initiating the transaction? Who is recording the transaction? Who is processing the transaction? If at all there's an error, who is making the corrections? Yeah. All of these aspects, whether those are linked to the IT systems or not. Yeah. And in relation to all of those systems, their linkage with the financial reporting. Their linkage with the financial reporting. Now, if we talk about this IT system, okay, let's suppose if we talk about IT system, now what does this IT system comprise of? It can comprise of the people, of course, because any system has to work with the help of people. Then, of course, infrastructure. Infrastructure could be the physical one or the soft one. Soft means software, physical one means hardware. Various procedures, policies in relation to that system. And of course, data will also be involved. Yeah. So an understanding of entire system as to how this has been working, what all linkages this system has in place with the financial reporting. Who is driving this system? Who is responsible for generation of reports? Who is responsible for checking any errors, if at all they arise in the systems? So this detailed understanding again becomes important as far as the systems of the organization is concerned. Now, similar to this, we can say are the activities of the organization. Now, a lot of points you may be thinking, sir, how are these really different? These are not different. These are all interrelated. They are all connected to each other. So when we talk about activities, so activities means what? Activities would mean various activities which are involved in a process. Yeah. So you can say activities could be the directions, the policies, the procedures which have been laid out in respect of executing a transaction, in respect of recording a transaction. Yes or no? Yes or no? Now, all of these activities become important. Now, those activities could be automated or those could be manual. Yeah. But they will all be aligned with the objectives of the organization. They all will be moving in the direction in which the organization has to move to achieve the overall objectives. Yeah. And similarly, the mechanism which the management has put in place. The management has put in place. Put in place for what? For the monitoring. Now, if you understand what all policies have been put in place, what all infrastructure is there, how the people are recruited, who all are involved in recording a transaction. Okay. So all of these things are what? They are all the points in relation to the creation, or you can say execution. Over and above that, there must also be a system which the management should put in place. For what? For monitoring. For monitoring, because to say that there is a control, to say that a control has been put in place is good. But the management also needs to understand that whether that control system, whether that process is currently operating in an effective manner or not. So that's why this process of monitoring of controls, what does it mean? Process to assess effectiveness of internal controls. Means the controls which are there, whether they are operating effectively or not. That is what you call as this process, which is again going to be linked to the overall internal control process. Yeah. So this becomes important. This becomes important for the auditor to look at, for the auditor to understand. Because till the time this is not looked at, till the time this is not understood by the auditor, he will not be able to get into this complete understanding about the internal controls which will be put in place, which might be existing within the organization. Okay. So now, as around this internal control, what we can do is maybe we can just take one small example, okay, with the help of which we'll try to get onto this understanding that how will the auditor get into this detailed understanding of the internal. Say, if we talk about payroll, okay, let's suppose we talk about payroll. Now, in relation to payroll, how many activities could be there within an organization? Tell me, how many activities could be there in an organization? So I think Hardik, this will address your question. Huh? How many activities will be there within the organization? How many activities? How many activities? I am talking about the activities. See, payroll is a process. Payroll is a process. But how many activities? I'm not talking about what activities. So I think Ritika is answering hiring. Ranjita Ranju is also saying recruitment. Ajay Surya says bookkeeping. So you are just naming the activities, which is good. I'm saying how many activities could be involved? Great. So Sheikh Parvez says multiple. Very good. Yes. So there are lot of activities. There are lot of activities which will be involved. Yes or no? There are a lot of activities which will be involved. Now, for an auditor to understand the internal control system, what is it that he'll start with? He will understand those activities. So let's suppose that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on. Okay. So auditor will understand all of those activities to begin. Now, in relation to all of those activities, what is it that he will look at? That in relation to activity number 1, what can go wrong? In relation to activity 2, what can go wrong? What can go wrong? Yes, similarly, for everything, what will he do? He will just look at what can go wrong. And is it the auditor who has to decide what can go wrong? No. Over here, auditor will only look at the management process because management would have documented this somewhere. Yes or no? Because all of these things which we are discussing right now would have been done by the management. So auditor will look at as to how the management has done this. How the management has done this. Once this is looked at, then the auditor will understand what all controls have been put in place. So this will be C1, this will be C2, this will be C3, this will be C4, this will be C5. Then the auditor will check that for all of these controls, are they operating effectively or not? Means how the management is checking this. That is what you call as monitoring of controls, means how the management is ensuring. See, in relation to all of these steps that we have discussed, auditor is not going to do anything. Auditor will only do the understanding part. Because each and everything that the auditor is doing is about the obtaining of understanding. So everywhere, what will he check? What is it that the management has done in respect of control? What is it that the management has done in terms of operating effectiveness of control? What is it that the management has done in respect of all of these activities, whether those have been put down at one place, wherein everything which could go wrong in respect of all of those activities, whether that has been done by the management or not. Okay, so you can say this is how this entire approach needs to be followed. And while this understanding will be obtained as around this particular process, auditor will be communicating with the payroll manager, or you can say the payroll head, or maybe various people who are involved in relation to this payroll process. He will also be talking to the accounts team as to how they are recording all of these transactions. So when he will understand, when he will be talking to them, when he will be speaking to them, when he will be making inquiries from them, he will also understand what is the approach of these persons, how particular they are in terms of following these policies, following these procedures. Yeah. Or are there any controls which the management has put in place, but which are not operating effectively? Yeah. So through this, what is it that the auditor will get? He will get to understand as to whether this entire system has been put in place in an appropriate manner or. So tell me one thing, if let's suppose you happen to be the auditor, okay, let's suppose you are the audit team member, you go to a client place, you talk to the payroll team, you also talk to the finance team around a lot of activities which are involved in the payroll process, okay, and you come across a lot of risks and various controls. So on the basis of this discussion, on the basis of this verbal inquiries, will you not be able to understand, assess about some of the aspects, about some of the elements in relation to the internal control system? Yes, tell me, what are your thoughts? Quickly, what are your thoughts? Tell me, will you not be able to get on to that? Tell me. Hardik says yes. Ritika says yes. And why does it happen? Because when you are talking to a lot of people, when you are looking at the activities which are going on in front of you, so there's something which is also coming to your mind. You are also making some observation. You will also get a feeling that okay, this system looks nice to me, this system looks strong to me, this looks weak to me. Yes or no? So that is something which you call as your first thought process around the complete process. Around the complete process. Yeah. So this is how this entire approach is required to be looked at. Understood? Yeah. Any questions, any doubts if you have? Though we have got few questions, I think we can also look at those questions to get some more clarity around it. Maybe then I can just come back to some of your questions. All right. So let's look at this. So this comes from your study material only. CA Smriti is an auditor of a company. As part of audit, she is going through policies and practices of the company regarding recruitment of employees, training, orientation, and various other matters, all related to the employees. She seems to be very much interested in finding out whether the company hires best candidates from the applicant pool. Identify what is it that she is trying to do. How gaining knowledge about this aspect is useful to her as an auditor. Yes, over to you. Quickly, over to you. Okay, Pranav says she's checking the efficiency of the control environment in respect of HR policies and practices. Okay, Aisha says she is looking at the human resource control, or we can say the control in respect of the human resource. Yeah. Then I think Dama says human resources are hired and managed effectively. So this is currently being looked at. All right. Pooja says effectiveness, or you can say the practices, effective practices of the HR department. Those are tried to be looked at. Okay. Dilip says internal control. This helps the auditor in respect of efficiency of the employees. All right. So now, one important aspect as around the audit, which you need to understand over here is that every time the auditor will get into any audit procedure, okay, whether it is about understanding of anything, whether it is about checking of anything, whether it is about analysis of anything, all of that has to have some linkage, some impact on the financial statements of the company. Okay. So if you are having this thought process that this auditor is trying to assess as to whether the employees are working effectively or not, means whether they are working with 100% efficiency or not. So that is not going to be the objective of the audit. Why? Because how is that going to have any impact on the financial statements? No. No. So every time any control, any risk, any activity is required to be looked at, you need to always remember one point. Yeah, you need to always remember that point. What is that point? That all of those things need to have linkage with the financial systems, financial statements. Whether you call it as financial reporting, financial information. Why? Because the objective of the audit is what? Objective of the audit is to audit the set of financial statements. If there is any operational matter which can have impact on the financial statements, that will be looked at by them. But if there is any operational matter which will not have any impact on the financial statements, That is not required to be looked at by the audit. Clear on this? Yeah. All right. So we'll look at one more example. During the audit of the same company, okay, so the company that we just discussed, so this particular auditor, CS Smriti, is keen to find out whether there exists a proper system of segregation of duties in the company. She wants to be sure that a person responsible for recording a transaction is different from the one who is authorizing that transaction. Discuss what she is trying to do and how its understanding is significant to her as an auditor. Over to you. Over to you. Quickly, huh? Quickly. Pranav says she's trying to check efficiency of flow of authority, organizational structure, nature. Great. Okay. So Sentra says assignment of authority and responsibility. Sure. Omkar says she's trying to understand segregation of duties under the components of control environment. Sure. Vaishnavi says she's trying to check control activities. Okay, Tambeshwari says she's checking the financial books. All right. So I think Mohammed says analysis of internal control. Yes, you can say that. Okay, Malu says that understanding the internal control. Yeah. So, but that I would say would be very generic. You need to be very specific, huh? All right. So Bhavna says it will increase the efficiency and the control over the activities. I think this is something which you just want to convey. Yeah, is it, Bhavna? All right, great. So good to understand. So I can see a lot of other responses. Sorry, I missed out. Now, in this case, she's gaining an understanding of the internal control. So when you make this statement, gaining an understanding of internal control, there's absolutely no doubt. Okay, this is being done. But you also need to be very clear that in terms of internal control, what is it that is being looked at? Okay, so if let's suppose you have to answer in the exam, you just can't write one liner, understanding of internal control. Maybe elaborate that a bit, maybe in 2-3 lines. Huh? So it's not necessarily required that you will talk about some of the components. Okay, but if you can just explain that properly, that is something which will really help you in terms of getting onto the point. All right. Yeah. Now, as far as the controls are concerned, so the controls are looked at, controls have been discussed. All of those controls, we understand they are also important as far as the audit is concerned. Okay. So this is something which is not new to us. We all understand that. Yeah. And as around the controls, we have also discussed that controls are really relevant as far as the financial statements are concerned, whether their completeness is concerned, accuracy is concerned. We also understand that internal controls try to achieve some objectives, which include safeguarding of assets. Okay. Now, those assets could be anything. Those assets could be the software. Those assets could be the hardware. It could be in relation to any of those things. Okay. But now comes the question, and which is really relevant and very important in the context of some of these things that we are required to look at, that when it comes to the understanding of the controls, how is this control, or you can say what is the approach which will be followed by the auditor? Okay, means what is it that the auditor will do in terms of getting into that, getting into the understanding. Okay. And over here, please remember that there can be a lot of technical points around it. For example, you can just read this part. Okay. An improperly designed control may represent a significant deficiency in internal control. Okay. Risk assessment procedures. What does it mean? Procedures in relation to risk assessment. To obtain audit evidence about design, implementation of relevant controls may include. So if I have to just put down this entire sentence in a simple manner, in a layman's language, then what can we say? That for the purposes of obtaining understanding of internal controls, following procedures may be followed. Means auditor can follow these procedures. What are these procedures? Inquiries. Do we know that? Yes. Observing the application of specific controls. So how do you observe? You'll go and check. You'll go and find out. You'll go and look at that activity. Inspecting the documents or reports. So when you go check a particular transaction, check a particular activity, so you may be required to look at some documents, any supporting document. So you'll go check that. What do you call it as? Inspecting the documents. Okay. At times, some of the transactions which you will look at, you may want to trace that to information system. So what does it mean, tracing the transaction through information system relevant to financial reporting? This appears to be too technical, isn't it? But how simple is that? Please try and understand. So let's suppose if you go look at an expense. Yeah. Now what is that expense? Let's suppose printing expense has been incurred. So what will you do? Let's suppose you have inquired with the accounts person. So he said, yes, for printing, we purchased some paper and that's why this expense is incurred. What are the controls, you'll ask? So you'll say, okay, so whenever any such expenditure is required, we'll take the approval of our senior. So that's a control in place. How will you observe it? You'll say, okay, no problem. So whichever transaction you have done, say maybe any of the paper that you have purchased, show me the bill and show me the approval of the senior. So he'll show that. So that is something which you have observed, you have also inspected. Now, what is it that you'll do? You'll say, okay, no worries, this printing expense, can you just trace this to the books of accounts, to the ledger, to the financial statements? So what do you call it as? Tracing the transaction through the information system. Now, information system could be Tally, this could be SAP, this could be Oracle, or this could be any other software, okay, which is being followed in respect of the financial reporting. Now, if we take this example and if we consider this entire approach in terms of obtaining an understanding. Now, what was the objective? Obtaining an understanding of the internal control. So do you think we have applied all of these steps? Or do you think we'll apply any other step? Generally, all of these steps will automatically get applied. Yes or no? Generally, all of these steps will automatically get applied. Yes or no? Dishika says yes. Aisha says yes. Yeah. So that's why, okay, one point which I just want to convey over here is that whenever you will read some of these pointers, and I'm sure this might be your thought process. Okay, many of you may be worried that, sir, we have been discussing all of these points. We have been discussing all of these things in a very layman language. Okay, even though we read some of these points, even if we look at some of those examples, we understand that. But all of these technical pointers, what do they mean? How are they different from what is it that we have been discussing? Or are they really different from the one that we have been discussing? So I think this should answer that concern of yours, isn't it? Yeah. So whenever you will go through this material or maybe any other material and you come across any such technical language, any such technical pointer, what do you need to do? You just need to pick up one practical example and a very, very simple practical example and apply that. Automatically, all of these technical pointers, all of these technical literature becomes easier for us? Tell me, do you agree with this? Or do you still have those challenges? Tell me, do you agree? Yes or no? Yeah. So every time, whenever you are bothered on any technical point, any technical language, any point which you believe, no, this is something which is different. So what do you need to do? Just think of any practical example, exactly similar to like I discussed this example of printing an expense. Printing expense. Yes or no? That is a very, very simple example. And in this example, we have just looked at the approach which the auditor will follow in terms of obtaining the understanding. So we are not saying that auditor will go and check that. No, we are not saying what all audit procedures he'll follow. No, we are just only checking if, let's suppose, if any person becomes the auditor, if he's required to understand that, what is it that he'll do? So automatically, all of these points is something we can say becomes the approach of that person. Yes or no? Yeah. So are you clear on this? Any questions, any doubts if you have around this, please let me know. Yes. So before we move further, any questions, any doubts, let's discuss that. So I think most of you are clear, but still, if there is anything, we can discuss that. Hardik is asking about control activities. So Hardik, let me just put it in a very, very simple manner. See, in relation to any process, if you remember, we took one example of payroll. So no, we took that example of payroll. And in that example of payroll, what did we discuss? That a lot of activities could be there. Yeah. Similarly, in an organization, there will be various processes. For example, capitalization. For example, recording of accruals. In relation to any of the process, a lot of activities are going to be involved. So if you have to understand the control environment, if you have to understand the control system, if you have to understand the control activity, what does it mean? It means you'll go first understand those activities. Now, activity in a technical term, what do you call that activity as? You can say if that activity can be called as a transaction on the part of an individual. It can also be called as a recording of a transaction if that gets recorded in the financial statements. It can also be called as a policy or a manual or maybe a flow of transactions. Yeah. So there are various ways through which you can just look at. But overall, on an overall basis, if we have to just look at what is it that we are talking about, we are talking about various steps which are involved in terms of execution of the flow of the transactions. And that is what you call as activities. Now, in relation to all of those activities, if you are required to look at the control, if you are required to look at the control, so what is it that you'll do? You'll understand the activity first and you will follow the same approach. Huh? So if you go back to our example, you'll look at activity 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What are the risks? Again, all of that. What are the controls against all of that? And what are the mechanism which the entity is following in respect of each and every such thing? Because please remember over here, we are not talking about as to what the auditor will do in terms of his checking. We are only talking about that auditor will obtain an understanding of what all management is doing or what all management has put in place. Okay. Mohammed is asking, sir, what is the meaning of Oracle? Oracle, you can say, is a software. Yeah, or you can say is an accounting package. Similar to, you can say SAP, for example. Okay, which is used by various organizations in terms of recording various transactions, yeah, for their financial reporting, for various reports. Okay, clear on this? Any other question? Omkar is asking, sir, is it allowable to write answers in simple language? See, that is what I've clarified earlier also. See, in the exam, what is important is, first of all, that you answer the question. Okay. Yeah. If you can just top up your simple language with the technical pointers, that will always look better. But nobody is stopping you from answering that in a simple language. The important point is that your thought process has to be very, very clear. Okay. That has to be exactly matching to the point. Yeah. And to match each and everything which is written over there in the book is not possible, because in such a case, you are only trying to mug up what is written over there. Idea is to understand, because if you can understand, you can just put down your thoughts, okay, with the clear cut understanding which you have obtained. So that's how you should approach it. Clear? So it's not that they are stopping you from doing this. All right. Any more questions? Any more doubts if you have? Ritika is asking, sir, we as auditors must know to use Oracle, Tally, etc. See, if you understand about it, if you know about it, that is always good. If you don't know about it, no worries, because when you will obtain their understanding, when you will see as to how they are operating, you will also get a working knowledge of it. Okay. But you can't say that it's a prerequisite. If you don't know it, you can't audit that. No, because as an auditor, you will have some limitations. Huh? You can't know each and everything. And that's why many a times you will also have experts in place. For example, if any client is following some sophisticated IT systems, so you may need IT experts, okay, who is going to help you on that. Clear on this? Yeah, Ritika, hopefully you are clear on this now. All right, so now moving further, see, as around this entire approach in relation to the internal control that we have looked at, what we can now do is we can now move on to understand that how this understanding of this internal control system, how this assessment of internal control system, how will this really help the auditor? What are the benefits? Though this is quite clear, I'm sure conceptually you would have understood that this is going to help the auditor quite a lot. But in terms of looking at various pointers, let's try to look at some of the benefits which are going to arise due to this. Through these internal controls, auditor will be knowing whether errors or frauds are likely to be located in the ordinary course of operations of the business or not. Whether an adequate, please remember, adequate internal control system is in place, and whether that is operating as planned. Whether an effective internal audit department is operating. Why? Because this can also help on the operating effectiveness of internal controls. Whether any administrative control has a bearing on the work of the auditor. For example, if the control over worker recruitment and enrollment is weak, there is a likelihood of ghost employees, means dummy employees can be registered and the salaries could be paid to them. Whether the controls are in place to safeguard the assets. Now, if you'll just read all of these points, don't you think that we have discussed all of these points already? Tell me, before I really move further, but don't you think that this is nothing new we have already discussed? Yeah. Or you can say it's a repetition. of something that we have discussed quite a lot. Yes or no? Yeah, appears to be that. And that is why I keep saying, very good answer. Omkar can really relate to that. Omkar is saying, sir, this is exactly there in the definition of the internal control. There you are. Very good. And that's why I'm saying that a lot of things that you are going to cover, you will find that they are linked to something or other that you would have already covered. Yes or no? Yeah. And that's why if you'll just keep revising every time, you will be able to establish the linkage. And let me just also explain you, if you establish the linkage, because I keep repeating about this establish of linkage, how this is going to help you. So let's suppose, because many a times you may have this question that, sir, how do we cut down in terms of our revision? How do we cut down? So there's too much of stuff. So what do we read? What do we not read? Now let me just help you in a very, very simple manner. Okay. Let's suppose if you've understood the definition of internal control, only the definition. So remember we discussed the definition of the internal control, meaning of the internal control. Yeah. Around the internal control, we have discussed a lot of points. What does it mean? Yeah. What does it mean? How does it operate? What is it that the auditor is required to do? Yeah. Remember that we have discussed that quite a lot. Quickly tell me. Yeah. So now, if you remember that, and if you can just apply that understanding over here, I'm just saying, let's suppose in your study material or maybe any of the material that you have been following, if let's suppose you read this section and you apply that definition or apply some of the sections that we have already covered, then what will happen? You will say, okay, do we need to read this? No. Why? Because this is already covered. I know this. I can understand this. So that's why what can you do? You can just simply skip this. Okay. So thereby what will happen? Thereby at the time of your examination, when you will have limited time to revise, you will not be able to revise each and everything. You will need ways to cut down on the topics, okay, which are repetitive. Why? Because I'm not saying that you need to skip this. No, in a way, by obtaining the understanding in relation to some of the parts that we have covered, you can automatically answer this. Or let me just also say that if the previous part is not understood by you, then you will not be able to answer this. Is that correct or not? If the previous part is not understood by you, do you believe you will be able to answer this without mugging up? Because the only way left to you will be what? You will just try to cram this. Okay, you will just try to mug up this. Yeah, understood? Yeah. So this I would suggest, because you keep asking us, sir, what is the approach? How should we approach? How should we revise? So I would say these are some of the things. These are the strategies which you can follow. All right. And similarly, you will find there are a lot of points. And let me just discuss all of these points. And you will find there's a lot of linkage. So auditor will get to know how far, how adequately management is discharging its function in respect of recording of transactions. How reliable are the reports, records, certificates? Extent and depth of examination that he needs to carry out. He means auditor. What would be appropriate audit technique, audit procedure? What are the areas where control is weak and areas where control is excessive? And whether some worthwhile suggestions can be given to improve the control system. Now tell me one thing, that we have read so many points. So 5 points over here and we can read 6 points over here. So total 11 points are there. But do you think we need to just simply mug up, or you will be able to just simply answer that on the basis of your previous understanding only? Tell me, yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no? Yeah. So this I would suggest should be your approach. And this can only be done if you just keep revising all of these things that we are discussing. Okay. Yeah. So let's look at this example. Mr. Y, one of the team member of the auditors of What and Where Limited. So that's the company. Yeah? So this is the company, What and Where Limited.
Sir, one clarification, sir.
Just a minute. Let me just get done with this because I've just started. I'll come to your queries. Mr. Y, team member, means the audit team member of this company, was very keen in knowing whether the internal control of the company would safeguard the company's assets.
Hello.
You are required to advise Mr. Y in respect of this. Tell me, over to you. So what would you advise Mr. Y to do? What should he do to achieve his objective? Yes. Yes, tell me. Pranav is saying, yes, safeguarding of the assets is definitely one of the objectives. Yes, of course. But what would he do? Ranjita Ranju is saying, inquire the employee personnel. Inquire in relation to what? Pallavi says, evaluate the internal control in respect of this. Very good. Yeah. Omkar says, review the internal control. Exactly. Yeah. So that's the only thing is required to do. That's the only thing is required to do. As simple as that. Yeah. All right. Next example. Mr. H, a team member of this company, There and Here Limited. It's a company. Was of the view that evaluation of internal control of the company would help in identifying the areas where the internal control is weak. Okay, so that's the thought process of audit team member H. You are required to advise. You are required to advise whether his thought is correct or incorrect. What does it need to do? Tell me. Okay, Rachna says yes. Very good. Pooja says yes. Priya says yes. Great. Vaishnavi, Ajay Surya, Tambeshwari, everyone is saying yes. And over here, what is it that the auditor needs to do? Very simply, he will just look into the internal controls, obtain the understanding, just go through them. Yeah. And through which he'll get to know whether the controls are strong or they are weak. Yes or no? Yes or no? Yeah. All right. So I understand you have some questions. Huh? Yes, please go ahead with your questions now.
Sir, just now you have, before this question, you have shown some query and 11 points, na, sir.
Yes.
That we have to remember, sir, for exam purpose, it will be asked in exam, sir, that 11 points.
So what is the question?
Just that previously I have shown some 11 points, na, sir.
Yes.
For internal control evaluation points, sir.
Right. All those benefits. You're saying
yes,
points
sir.
related to the benefits.
Yes, sir. Evaluation of internal control system. Where this we have to remember and question will come like this, sir. For writing this answer, I must.
See, there are a couple of questions you have asked, and let me just clarify everyone. So he's asking the question that approximately 11 points we have discussed as around the benefits of the evaluation of internal control. So his first question is, can this question be asked in the exam? Yes, of course. There could be a question in the exam wherein you are required to just put down some pointers as to what are the benefits of the evaluation of internal control. So can this question come? Of course, yes. Will this question come? Nobody knows. Okay.
Oh, okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you,
okay?
sir. Thank you.
Now the second question, but let me just help you. No worries. The second question he's asking is that do we need to remember all these 11 points? I think over this, you can help him. So what do you think? Do you need to remember all of these points? I think you were just trying to understand that do we need to mug up all of these points or what should be our approach?
We can remember, sir. We can remember. If we read 2-3 times, you can remember definitely.
Right, of course. But what is it that you will follow to remember? Very simply, get on to the conceptual understanding of the topic. So if you understand internal control conceptually,
yes, sir. Yes.
okay, automatically, see, these are 11 points. Let me just tell you, you will be able to write down 20 points on your own.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. And that should be good enough, huh? So of course,
Yes.
you may think, sir, what if my language is not matching with this? That can always happen. Huh? And in fact, if you ask me, my language will not match with this if I am asked to answer this. Okay, because if I have to match this, that can only be possible if I just mug it up. Otherwise, I'll not be able to match it. Okay, point by point. Yeah.
Okay.
And matching is not the objective at all. Objective is that you understand that and you put down your understanding exactly in the manner the way it has been explained to you.
Presented. Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you,
Okay.
sir. Thank you.
All right. And any more questions?
Sir,
Any more questions? Yes.
Sir?
Yes.
Sir, I'm not able to understand information system including in related business processes. This
All
is
right.
also.
So no worries. So do you understand the IT system for an organization?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So tell me one thing, if there's a company which follows Tele, so will you call Tele as an IT system or not?
Yes, sir. It is an IT system.
It's an
Tele,
IT system.
Oracle, SAP, and all
Yeah, they are
IT
all
systems.
IT systems.
Yes, sir.
And do you believe that organizations follow or use some of these IT systems for producing their financial information like trial balance, ledgers, books of accounts, financial reporting?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that is
Yes, sir.
exactly the meaning of IT systems which are linked to the financial reporting. That is what is meant by that. As simple as that. Now clear on this?
So,
Yes.
okay, sir. All the general entries and all will be recorded on the IT systems by the company, and it is the responsibility of the auditor to check it.
Of course, it's the responsibility of the auditor to check it, but over here we are not getting on the responsibility of checking it. We are just trying to
Understand.
discuss first point that auditor should understand this system first of all.
Okay, sir.
Before getting to the checking, he should understand this system. And can you now understand that how this understanding of IT system will help the auditor?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, because if let's suppose a company is following Tele, auditor doesn't know anything about Tele. Say for example, he is new to a company. He knows nothing about Tele. He go ask for a ledger. He go ask for a report. And he doesn't know as to how the Tele works or what could be the loopholes which could be there in Tele, what could be the problems in Tele or anything which is there in the IT systems of the company. Will he be able to design his audit procedures appropriately?
No, sir.
Yeah. So that's the whole objective of getting onto the understanding. So when it comes to the understanding of the organization, it includes each and every aspect of the organization, which is in some way or other linked to the financial reporting. What do you mean by financial reporting? For the purposes of audit, you can say it's always financial statements.
Statements.
Whether it is about any ingredient of financial statement, for example, a journal entry, for example, ledger, or whether that is about financial statement as a whole. Clear?
Okay, sir. Sir, but it is not mandatory for the company to always make the reports on the IT system. It can do it manually as well.
Of course, yes. So as far as the company is concerned, auditor is not going to put down any mandate that you follow one IT system, make me understand that, and then I'll get on to the check.
Okay,
Auditor
sir.
will always go check. Check means he'll understand that let's suppose organization has got 50 activities. Okay, let me just break this entire organization into 50. So let's suppose if the entity says that 40 of our activities are manual, 10 are done through a system. So you'll understand that what is being done
Okay, sir.
manually, how is that done manually, What is being done? Through the
Okay,
systems.
sir.
How is that done? Through systems. And therein he'll also assess the risk which the management has observed, management has identified. What all controls management has put in place? How the management has been monitoring those controls. Okay?
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Sure. Yes. Anyone else? Any more
Sir,
questions? Yes, Ritika.
can you explain point D?
Point D
Dummy
is
dummy name.
dummy employee means, let's suppose an organization is paying salary to a person, but he is actually not an employee. Okay, that's a fake employee. Means he is not working for the organization. It's a fraud. Understood?
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
Sir, what does inquiring of entity personnel means?
Inquiry means you go ask questions. Entity personnel means employees of the entity.
Oh,
So when you
inquiring
go
the
discuss something,
person.
you go ask questions. That is what you call as inquiry.
Oh, okay, sir. Thank you.
All right. All right. Any more questions? So I think maybe because there's a stoppage, so we can also take a break over here. Huh? Yeah. So if you have any questions, we can just discuss the questions and then we can take a break.
Dummy names are
Sorry? Sorry, I missed. So what is your question?
the dummy names are the persons who are contractual workers or the person who are not working actually, but their names are mentioned for the account balancing.
Sorry, your voice is not clear. Can you please repeat?
They're the dummy names mentioned in the auditing.
Dummy names mentioned in the audit. What does it mean? I'm not clear on the question.
So the workers which are not actually working, they are known as the dummy people
See,
or
dummy,
the persons who are the contractual workers outsourcing.
no, it could be anything. So when we are talking about dummy employees, so let's try to understand the objective. Let me just give you one small example to discuss this. Just a minute, because I think this was an example to help you understand this topic. So let's suppose there's an organization. Let's suppose this is ABC Limited and they have 50 employees. So if you look at their payroll record, okay, so payroll record shows organization has got 50 employees. Fine. If
Yes, sir.
out of 50, 10 employees do not exist physically, whether they are on payroll, whether those are permanent, temporary, contractual, okay, let's ignore that. Please try to understand the objective that we are trying to discuss. Out of 50, 10 employees do not exist. They are only put down on a piece of paper. Why? Because it's fake. Actually, there are only 40 employees who are working in the organization. But currently, salaries are being paid to 50. Okay. So in such a case, these 10 employees, these are called as dummy employees, or you can say ghost employees. Clear on this?
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay, so then I think this question comes from Shini. She is asking, sir, why internal auditor is not discussed here in internal control process? See, internal audit is a detailed discussion in itself. And internal audit is a complete process altogether, which an organization may want to establish. Why? Because this is also one of the ways to bring in more controls. We'll spend some time on this, maybe at a later stage, on this internal audit aspect as well. As of now, you can just say that this is one of the mechanisms through which organization can bring in control, or organization may want to establish control. Okay.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, in this case, if we found that there are 10 fake employees, then is there any treatment that we have to do, or it will come on later stage?
See, if let's suppose you happen to be the auditor and you come across any such situation wherein there are only 40 employees, but expense for 10 more employees has been recorded. So can you tell me what will you call this as? So let's suppose for
Ghost
40
employees,
employees, 400 is recorded, and for these 10, 100 is recorded. So can
overstate,
you tell me what will you call this 100 as?
overstatement of payroll.
Overstatement, or you can say wrong recording of this expense of rupees 100.
Yes,
Yes or
sir, wrong
no?
record. Yes, sir.
So tell me, if you are the auditor, what will you do?
I will reverse it.
You will not reverse, you will ask the client to reverse this. Correct?
Okay.
And of
Okay,
course,
sir.
as an auditor, your comfort level will also go down. Yes or
Yes,
no?
sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So exactly this is something which you'll do. And who has answered this question? You only.
Okay, sir. Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Great. Okay. So then I think this name is missing, sir. He's asking what is safeguarding of assets? Safeguarding of assets means the assets of the organization are protected. They are safeguarded. Okay. They are not being misused. They are not lost. They are not stolen in a way. Okay. They are taken care of. Yeah. But so over here in this context, you can say that what is it that the management is doing to make sure that the assets are safeguarded, assets are taken care. Yeah. So an example for this could be, say, organization has got 50 laptops. In a company, there are 50 laptops. So what is the system which the company has put in place to ensure that the laptops are not stolen? That system, you will say, is a system for safeguarding assets, safeguarding laptops. Hardik is saying, sir, a daily count can be done for this. Of course, yes. Or maybe the person who has been given this laptop, okay, whoever is accessing that laptop, so he has been made accountable for that. That is what organizations will do. So whenever a laptop is issued, so the person to whom that is issued, he will be held responsible if any problem happens to that. Okay, so in a way, the accountability has been established to the respective employee. So that is one of the control mechanism. Okay, yeah. So I think we can take a break now, and after the break we'll continue. So I think Nisar, we can break. All right, so I think we can continue on. Okay, so I'm just hoping everyone is back. Yeah, so shall we continue? All right, great. So please remember that we are not yet done in terms of our discussion on the risk assessment. So now coming back to the point that we started discussing, we were discussing risk assessment. In relation to risk assessment, we were looking at understanding, obtaining an understanding. We discussed about entity. We discussed about the internal control system. Around the internal control system, when we discussed definition, we also discussed today what are the various components. Okay, what is it that the auditor needs to do? And so far, all of these things are only limited to obtaining the understanding. Okay, now we are not yet done on this. Okay, some of you may be thinking, but sir, are we done with this now? No, we are not yet done with this. Still, as around the internal control, you can say in terms of obtaining an understanding about them, evaluating them, assessing them, there are some methods which have been prescribed. Now we are going to look at some of those methods, with the help of which we'll try to understand as to how this evaluation of internal control can be done. Okay, so let's talk about first method, which is called as narrative. Before I get too technical on this point, if let's suppose you have to go understand something, okay, or if let's suppose we are discussing something, say you are attending this session today, yeah. Now, if there is any topic we have been discussing, so what can happen is we will discuss the theory around it, means we'll discuss the content around it, we'll discuss the subject matter, and there are a lot of points around that topic that we will speak about. You can say at the first place, what is it that you will obtain? You will obtain a description. You will obtain a description. Yes or no? Now, what does this description include? This description will include each and everything about the internal control. Means what is the process, what are the activities, what is the control, who is taking care of that control, who is the maker, who is the checker, yeah, all of these things. So this description, when you note it down, when you put it down, that is what you call as a narrative, or you can say a narrative which is recorded. Narrative, in very, very simple words, you can say is the description, is the description. You are going and understanding about something in more detail, in greater detail. Now, if it comes to any process, if it comes to any process which is in relation to an organization which is, let's suppose, say small, okay, or which let's suppose is even for a medium-sized organization, therein to get into this detailed description or to record that in such a manner can still be relevant. But when it comes to the large organizations, wherein the processes are quite descriptive, okay, which involve a lot of activities, and therefore a lot of controls will be put in place. If you go obtain this description, record everything in writing, this may not really be relevant. This may become too difficult for you as an auditor, because this is something which you are doing. Okay, so that's why another approach which you can follow could be that of a checklist So another approach which you can follow could be that of a checklist. Now, what do you mean by a checklist? So a checklist will include, so I would say, first way was through a narrative. Second could be through a checklist. Now, when it comes to a checklist, now what is a checklist? Checklist, you can say, is a set of questions, which is a kind of instruction and which is put down on a piece of paper, which you go and ask the client in relation to various activities. Okay, for which generally you will get 3 answers. What are those 3 answers that you will get? Either yes or no or not applicable. Not applicable means if you will put across a question which is not applicable to the client, so what will it say? This is not applicable to me. Okay, for example, now what could be an example for this? Say you are talking about payroll. You are talking about payroll. So let's suppose you are given 5 set of questions. Okay. What does it mean? Or what could those questions be? Can you just frame some questions quickly and help me with those questions in relation to payroll? I'll also put down some points. So first question could be that does the organization, does the entity have any HR policy in relation to recruitment? Okay, so that is going to be the first question. What's the first question? Does the entity have any policy in relation to recruitment? So what will be the answer to this? Tell me. So if you happen to be the client, if I ask this question to you, what could be the possible answer? Either yes or no. Yeah, of course, not applicable will not be the one. Yeah, so it will either be yes or no. Similarly, lot of other questions can be asked, and I think I missed out some of the questions with which you helped me. Yeah, so Pranav is saying there could be a question that whether the salaries have been paid to the employees as per the policies. Policy could be, you can say, as per the contractual arrangement, as per the contract. Hardik says we can go ask them, does the entity have any mechanism for training of employees? For training of employees? Yes or no? So this could be another question which can be put across. Yeah, this could also be one of the questions. Yeah, and I can see a lot of questions you are also framing and helping me with that. Great. So this is what a checklist will do. This is what a checklist will do. Okay. And this checklist will help the auditor obtain answers in respect of various activities, in respect of various controls over those activities. Yeah, you can just simply say this is one of the ways of evaluation of the internal control. This is one of the ways which can be followed for evaluation of internal control. Okay. Now, another one. let me just open one document and we can just look at that document to get some more insights as around that. Just give me a minute. Okay, so now over here, the third method which could be followed could be in the form of a questionnaire. Okay, this could be in the form of a questionnaire. So this is similar to what you see in case of a checklist. This is similar to what you see in case of a checklist. Now, what is a questionnaire? How does this questionnaire look like? What all questions you will ask? Because as the terminology suggests, it's a questionnaire. Means it's a document which is all about questions. So let's go through one questionnaire and try to understand what are the questions, how this questionnaire will really look like. So say in respect of purchases, purchase is a flow. It's a process in an organization. So now what will be the first question? Are the purchases centralized in the purchase department? Which needs to be answered by the client. Which needs to be answered by the client. Question number 2, are the purchases made only from approved suppliers? Is there a list of approved suppliers maintained for this purpose with the organization? Does the master list contain more than one source of supply for all imported materials? Are the purchase orders based on valid purchase requisition? Are the purchases based on competitive quotations from 2 or more suppliers? Means, are the quotations obtained or not from 2 or more suppliers? Are the purchase orders numbered? Means, is there a numbering on the purchase orders? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Are the purchase orders signed by employees who are authorized to sign that? So can you see this? Yeah. Can you understand the questions? Tell me quickly. Yeah. So all of these questions are framed in respect of the organization. If let's suppose you put across this complete document. Okay. So now in this document, what will happen? In respect of purchases, all the questions will be put down. Yeah. All the questions will be put down. And this will be given to the client, or you can say this will be discussed with the client. So either you can go and give them, they will answer it and give it back to you, or you can just go sit with them, keep asking the questions and they will keep answering. Okay, both the approaches are followed by the auditors. It can be through either of the approaches. Yeah. Now, similarly, for creditors, this can be done. For inventories, this can be done. Yeah. So these are all examples. Similarly, for PPE, this can be done. Yeah. So this is generally issued to the client. So if you read this note at the last, what does it say? This is generally issued to the client, means given to the client. And the client is requested to fill this. Fill this means client will fill this. So client will answer this yes, no, or not applicable. And generally, you will ask the client to also put the explanations for yes, for no, for not applicable. Why? Because through the explanations, you will be able to understand this in a better manner. If let's suppose these are only answered yes, no, but the explanations are missing. So you may be required to go back to the client and then discuss this again. So this may become a duplicacy. Okay. Though practically, if you'll go look at, so these are given to the clients, they will generally fill this yes, no, and then you will again go meet them and you will again maybe have some clarifications. You'll ask again some similar sort of questions and you may want to just add on to that over and above what the client would have filled. Okay. So this is how it really practically works. But this is one of the approaches which is followed by the auditor, or you can say one of the methodology which is followed by the auditor in respect of evaluation of the internal control. Okay, so you can say over here, What is it that we are trying to do? We are just trying to look at the mechanism which is followed by the auditor in respect of evaluation of the internal control. So all of our discussions are around that part. Okay. There's one more way. There's one more way which is followed by the auditors, and that is what you call as a flow chart. Flow chart. Now, do you understand a flow chart? Anyone? Do you understand a flow chart? Quickly, do you know what is a flow chart? I think everybody must be knowing about this flow chart. Huh? Kasak says yes. Rati Maliani says yes. Quickly, huh? Nuruddin says yes. Very good. So, do you know a flow chart? Yeah, great. So, flow chart is something with which everybody must have dealt. Can you tell me the benefits of the flow chart? Great. Shweta says flow chart is nothing but a graphical presentation of the subject. I think same is the response from Afzal and Pranav. Great. Now, sometimes organizations put down their SOPs, put down their processes in the form of a flow chart. Okay. Wherein they will not put down each and everything in a descriptive manner. Remember the first part, when you just describe everything. That is what you call as narrative. Instead of narrative, instead of description, you can always have flow chart. Yeah. So will that serve the same purpose? The answer is yes. The presentation is different. Okay, over here, the presentation is different. What is the presentation? It's a graphical presentation. Objective will again remain the same. Understanding of the process, understanding of the risks, understanding of the controls which have been put in place. And that is something which will be put down in the help of with the help of a flow chart. Yeah. So these are some of the ways. Now, you may have a question, sir, is there any prescribed way or is there any preferred way? What should be our approach? If let's suppose we happen to be the auditor, how is this practically done? See, practically any of these ways could be followed. Whichever suits the auditor, depending on the size of the entity, depending on the documentation which the management has been following. Yeah, depending on how robust these documentation the management may be maintaining. Okay, so depending on that, any of these methodologies could be adopted by the auditor as far as its evaluation is concerned. But all of these methodologies will get the auditor to one conclusion. What is the conclusion? Conclusion is very similar. That evaluation of internal control. Then I think, Hardik, to answer your question, they are quite similar in nature. Huh? The only difference is that internal, this questionnaire is quite descriptive. Okay, quite detailed. But when it comes to a checklist is more in respect of specific activities, specific areas, wherein a set of questions is given to you. Okay, so one, you can say there is a process which captures or there's a document or there's a questionnaire which captures this complete process in entirety. So that is how this is generally looked at. And checklist is more of in respect of some of the areas, not for a complete process, and which is more of a set of instructions which is given by the seniors to the juniors of the audit team. Okay, so that's how it really works. But generally, practically, you will not see a lot of differences between these two. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Any questions, any doubts if you have on this? Because I've got some questions, I think, which we can discuss as around these methodologies to get some more clarity on this. All right, so what we can do is we can just look at these questions. In order to evaluate the internal control of your and my limited. So this is the name of the company. Yeah, very interesting names I can see. A team member of the auditors used a method according to which number of questions relating to internal control of the company were required to be answered by the employees of the company. After obtaining the answers, there was a discussion relating to those answers between the team member and the auditor. Okay, between the team member of the auditor and the employees. You are required to comment which evaluation method it appears to be. Okay, so there are 4 methods we have discussed. So which method do you think has been opted for, has been used in the given scenario, and why? Over to you. Over to you. Quickly, huh? Nuruddin says clearly it's a questionnaire. Anuj says it's a questionnaire. Okay, great. I think Pooja says questionnaire. Very good. VR says questionnaire. What about others? Dishika says questionnaire. Okay, great. What about others? Quickly, quickly. So what do you think is the methodology which has been followed? Then I think one person, Nitin, says narrative. Narrative, okay. Deepak says questionnaire. Okay. Then I think Kasak says checklist. Bhaskar says flowchart. I think you just need to get into this question, please. Because some of you who are saying flowchart, narrative, I'm getting confused. See, in this case, a number of questions have been put across. So a document has been prepared wherein number of questions have been put across. So can it be a narrative or a flowchart? Tell me. Tell me. Those two are not possible at all. Those two are not possible at all. Yeah. Now, next, your confusion could be between a checklist and a questionnaire. Yes, of course. But please understand that checklist is again not something, okay, for which you will follow this approach. Because over here, what has been done? What has been done? Okay, employees were required to answer this. If you read this line, means this has been given to the employees. Something which you will follow in case of a questionnaire. Okay, and after obtaining this, as I told you practically, after obtaining this, still there will be a lot of clarifications. So auditor and client meet. They again meet physically. They will discuss some of those questions for a clarity. Clarity means for clarifications. So this is exactly what we discussed is required or is something which you follow in case of a questionnaire. Yeah. So that's why in this case, what will you call this as? This will clearly be a case of an internal control questionnaire. Yeah. Another example. Another example. Healthy and Useful Limited is into small manufacturing as well as trading business. For the purposes of evaluating the internal control of this company, a team member, an audit team member, used the method according to which entire description of the internal control. Please remember, entire description of the internal control that was operating in the said company was required to be recorded. You are required to identify the method of the evaluation of internal control. Don't you find this question to be quite simple? I think it is evident from your responses. Everyone is saying it's a narrative. Very good. Pallavi says it's narrative. I have missed out so many responses. Sundarya says it's narrative. Yeah. Yeah. Hardik is saying it's narrative. Aisha says it's narrative. Exactly. Yeah. So now you can just expect and you can just look at it yourself that this is the level of questions you will expect. So can you now understand from some of these questions which you are looking at? Yes or no? Yeah. Yes or no? Are you clear on this? All right. So now, as you just mentioned, that this is all about a narrative record method, wherein you can just explain why this is narrative. Why? Because this whole description which has been asked for, this is something which you follow in case of a narrative only. Otherwise, it will not be there. Otherwise, it will not be there. Understood? Clear on this? Yeah?
Sir, can you checklist and internal control questionnaires between different telling?
Yes. So as I told you, a lot of similarities. See, internal control questionnaire is something you can say is a document wherein you'll just put down a process, and around that process you'll put down all the questions which you give to the client. You submit that, client will fill this, give it to you, you will go to the client for clarifications. Checklist, on the contrary, is a set of instructions. You can say a set of questions which the seniors will provide to the juniors. Juniors will go ask those questions from the client, okay, which is going to be in respect of certain areas, certain specific areas, unlike that detailed questionnaire which you find in case of this questionnaire approach. Clear on this? Clear on this? Yeah?
Yes, sir.
All right, great. So now what we will do is we'll just try to get into the audit approach. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just put an end, maybe briefly, to this entire discussion on the risk assessment, and of course on the understanding of entity, environment, internal control system, all of these things. Okay, so you can say largely we are done with this. There is some part which is pending in relation to that, but I'll just plan to cover that slightly later. Now what we'll do is we'll just move further on this. Okay, and in relation to this, we'll just try to understand our audit approach. Okay, so let's try to understand as to how, in case of an audit, if let's suppose you happen to be the auditor, how practically you will approach the audit. Okay, it's a very, very important discussion over here. So that's why I need your attention. And if you want any clarification, please put across your questions. Huh? Okay, very, very important point. Now, as a first step, if let's suppose you will be the auditor, so what will you do? You will do audit planning. Correct? You will do audit planning. This is going to be your first step. Yes or no? Yeah. Now, in relation to this audit planning, we discussed that first of all, you need to understand the client, industry, environment, everything about the client in a way. Okay. So now, for this planning, what was the steps you have taken? You will go, you will meet the client, you will have discussions with the client to obtain understanding. Correct? So this is going to be your step number 1. And in relation to understanding, you will also want to understand about the internal controls. So you'll ask the questions, you'll ask for the explanations, whichever methodology you follow, you will want to obtain the understanding around the internal controls. So this is something that we already understand. Now, if let's suppose there are two persons, A is the auditor, C is the client. Now, the role of the auditor is what? To make sure that client is doing the things in an appropriate manner. In a layman term, I'm just using this. Yes or no? In a layman term, can we say that or not? Yeah. And client may be making some mistakes intentionally or unintentionally. So that's why if I happen to be the client, then I'll generally not want to discuss too much information with the auditor. Why? Because if I'm making intentional mistakes, which is fraud, I would like to hide the things from the auditor. Yes or no? Yes or no? So if I am the client, if I'm making intentional mistakes, I would like to hide the information as much as possible from the auditor. Do you agree with this? Everyone quickly, please confirm. Okay. Sometimes, even where the client is not making mistakes intentionally, there are a lot of employees in the organization. They are not worried about the overall objectives of the organization. For them, it's only about a job wherein they will go, do their daily activities and come back home. Yes or no? Their intention is not wrong. Please understand. They are not making any fraud. They are not involved in any fraud. But they understand they are human beings, so that's why they can make mistakes. They can make mistakes. And they also understand that auditor will come or auditor has come and he will find out all those mistakes which have been made by the employees. So that's why some of those employees, even though they are not making the mistakes intentionally, they may not want to share each and every information or write information with the auditor. Is that correct or not? Tell me quickly. Yes or no? Quickly. I'm just waiting for you to answer. This is very, very important. Yeah, is this correct? Yeah, makes sense? Great. All right. So now, with this understanding that there could be two sets of employees in an organization, one who are making intentional mistakes. That's why they may not be wanting to share complete information or right information. Second, there could be some employees who are not making intentional mistakes. They may also not be willing to share the right set of information with the auditor. Now, if the auditor go and obtain this understanding, what does it mean? This is all verbal. So whether you do this narrative, whether you do this flow chart, whether you do this questionnaire, all of this is what? This is all based on questions. This is all based on inquiries. Has the auditor checked anything so far? Tell me, has the auditor checked anything so far? No. So if let's suppose auditor has put down 100 questions, whether those have been asked in person or whether those have been filled by the client and submitted to the auditor, can the client answer that inaccurately or not? Yes or no? Tell me. Tell me, is that a possibility or not? Yeah. Okay. And even if, let's suppose everything has been explained. So let me just take up an example of third category of employees who have not been making any intentional mistakes and who are willing to share every information, the right information with the auditor. Even in that case, the understanding which the auditor may have obtained, auditor may not get complete clarity. Is that possible or not? So even after discussions, auditor may not be very clear. For example, if we discuss a lot of topics, do you get complete clarity around each and every topic? Tell me. So let's suppose when we discuss, Dilip says no. So what do you ask? You will ask for examples. So you'll say, no, sir, I don't understand. Okay, sir, this is not clear. Can you give me some examples? So this is something which you will do or not? Tell me quickly. So if you don't understand anything, you'll ask questions. You'll say, give me, sir, give me some example. Without the example, we are not understanding. So you have explained very nicely, but please give one example. Yeah. So that is what you will do. Because the moment I'll give you an example, you will say, okay, now we are clear. Now with the example, you will get a lot of clarity. Does that happen to you? Tell me. Yeah. Does that happen to you? Tell me quickly. Yes or no? Yeah. So exactly similar is the case of the auditor. Exactly similar is the case of the auditor. After obtaining this understanding, okay, so if I'll say that this obtaining the understanding, if this is step 1, what is it that the auditor would want to do? Auditor will do a walkthrough. Okay, auditor will do a walkthrough. So what do you mean by walkthrough? Walkthrough means auditor will say, so let's suppose auditor is discussing with the payroll department. So payroll has explained a lot of points. Auditor will say, okay, I understand everything. Can you just give me one example? Can you just show me one live transaction, or can you just show me one transaction so that I'm just able to understand everything in an appropriate manner? So auditor is walking through whatever has been explained to him. Can you understand this? Auditor is walking through whatever has been explained to him. So what does it mean? In very simple terms, you can say it's all about taking one example. Okay, it's all about taking one example. Over here, through this walkthrough, what is it that the auditor will obtain? Again, auditor will only obtain the understanding. Auditor will only obtain the understanding. Correct? Yes or no? So even with the walkthrough, auditor will obtain the understanding, because objective of the auditor was not to test, not to check, was to make sure that whatever he has understood was correct or not. Okay, whether he has understood appropriately or not. Maybe the client wanted to explain something, but the auditor didn't understand. So that's why he said, okay, give me one example. Yeah, after the example, he got very, very clear on this. Yeah. Okay, now, once this understanding is completed, what is going to happen? A very critical step will come into picture. And that is what you call as testing. Now the auditor will say, okay, around this organization, in respect of payroll, I have understood everything. There is no activity in payroll which I have not understood. There is no risk which I have not understood. There is no control which I have understood everything. Okay, I have understood everything. But can the auditor just stop here? Tell me, is the role of the auditor to obtain the understanding of everything? Tell me. Pooja says no. Yeah, Tambeshwari says no. So what is the role of the auditor? The role of the auditor is to check, to examine. That is what Ratimalini says. And exactly what is going to be the next step of the auditor. Auditor will now say that whatever I have understood, I'll test that. So now auditor had understood internal controls. So that's why, what is it that the auditor will start with? Auditor will say, okay, I'll start with the testing of these internal controls first of all. Okay, auditor will say, okay, let me begin with the testing of these first. So auditor is not getting onto the examination of financial statements. Auditor is not getting onto the calculations. Auditor is not getting onto the presentation in the financial statements. No. All those internal controls, all those internal control systems, all of those understanding which he has obtained, he is now going to test them. Okay. So now, if we say that auditor will go and test them, then this again needs to be broken into two parts. Why? Because internal control had got two stages. Can anyone help me with two stages of internal control? See, broadly for internal control system, we can say there are two parts. There are broadly two parts. Let me just see who can answer this. If you have got the conceptual understanding of internal control, and if I require you to break this down into two stages, let me just see who can answer this. Internal control system, what are the two broad stages of the internal control system? Ritika says preliminary and after one. Okay. Pratimalini says recording and review. Okay, great. What about others? Then I think VR says planning, execution. Amit says mechanism and effectiveness. I think somewhere you are there. And let me just put down this in technical terms. One, you will call as design. Design means whenever management, see, internal control belongs to whom? Management. So if the management has put the internal control system in place, they must have some document in relation to internal control. That is what you call as design of internal. And the second stage will be what? That design is not good enough. So let's suppose a policy is rolled out, that policy is not good enough. That should be operating effectively. It's important that it is operating effectively, because if that is not operating effectively, so what is going to happen? That internal control is of no use. That design is of no use. Yes or no? That design is of no use. Correct? Yeah. So that's why if the auditor has now to start with the testing of the internal control, what would it mean? That he will test this design and he will test whether this design is operating effectively or not. Yes or no? Tell me. So these are the two things which the auditor will be required to do. Tell me. Yeah? Tell me. Yes or no? Quickly. So these are the two things which the auditor will be required to do. Correct? All right. So now, great. Now let's suppose you come across a company. Okay, so it's a question to you. So let's suppose if you come across a company, you happen to be the auditor for that company, and you have tested the internal controls. So what are the types of problems you can observe? Kasak is saying, sir, how will you do that testing? I'll come to that. So we are not yet done, please. So quickly, I'm just trying to explain you the flow of audit as to how this flow of audit will be. So can you tell me, if these controls are tested, what are the two broad categories of observations an auditor may have? What are the two broad categories of observations an auditor may have? Quickly, I think it's quite easy for you to answer. Quickly, what are the two broad categories? Vedi says, is the internal control is a necessary area? Tambeshwari says, very good. Design and operating effectiveness. Very, very good. So now, very simple. So two problems could be, one, that the organization doesn't have a system in place or design is not in place. Maybe in respect of payroll, auditor found that a lot of documents, a lot of manuals were not put in place. They didn't exist. Forget about their implementation, their operating effectiveness. If the policy is not in place, what will be the implementation? Zero. Or second risk, second problem could be that controls are there on a piece of paper, but they are not operating effectively. They are not operating effectively. Correct? So these are the two situations which may arise. Yes or no? So these are the two possible situations which may arise. Or you can say the negative situations. Or the third situation could be that the controls are operating effectively. Controls are operating effectively. Now, in this case, can you tell me that is the auditor checking everything? Is the auditor applying all the audit procedures when he is testing the controls? Tell me, when the auditor is testing the controls, is he checking everything in relation to the financial statements? The answer is no. Why? Because he is only testing the controls. He is limited to testing of internal controls. So that's why there's a lot of checking on his part, which is still pending. Which is still pending. So how will he plan that? That comes the question. How will he plan that? How will he check that? For doing that, you need to understand one point, that once this testing of control, once this testing of control is completed, there will be two situations. Either the controls will be operating effectively, or they will not be operating effectively. Yes or no? So these are the two situations which are possible. Correct? So tell me one thing, if let's suppose you happen to be the auditor of an entity wherein controls are operating effectively, so will your comfort increase in respect of that company or not? Will your comfort increase? Will you be more confident? Yes or no? Yeah. And that's why, what will you do? In respect of checking, in respect of applying your audit procedures, you will say, no, the systems of the organization are quite strong. They have a lot of controls in place. So that's why chances of making a mistake will be lesser. That's why if the controls are operating effectively, so extent of testing will be lower. If the controls are not operating effectively, extent of testing will be higher. Extent of testing by the auditor will be higher. Okay. Now, how is this extent of testing going to be lower? What is it that the auditor will check lesser? What is it that the auditor will check higher? That is something that we need to discuss. Okay. That is something which we need to cover in more detail in our subsequent sessions. As of now, you can say that all of those procedures which the auditor is required to do subsequent to testing of control, yeah, can be categorized into substantive testing, and analytical procedures. In case of substantive testing, what is it that the auditor will do? Auditor will check the details. Auditor will check the records. Auditor will check the information. Auditor will check the calculations. Auditor will check the vouchers. Auditor will check the invoices. All of these are examples of what? substantive testing, which is also called as test of detail. Test of detail. Analytical procedures we have already touched upon briefly. Yeah. So you can say these are the two set of audit procedures which will come subsequent to testing of control. Please remember that these two set of procedures, I'm talking about these two. I'm talking about these two. So these two come subsequent to testing of control. Why? Because first of all, auditor will want to establish as to how strong the controls are there in the organization. Why? Because accordingly, he will structure his audit procedures. He will design. He will also decide whether he needs to do more work or lesser work. Okay. Yeah. So this was broadly the flow. So my idea was to just to give you a flow as around this complete audit process as to how does it really moves. As we discussed that this substantive, analytical, all of these things you are going to cover in more detail as we move further. Okay. As of now, we'll come back to our first point. Our objective now will be to discuss the testing of control. Okay. Yeah. So this is something that we are going to take up in our next session. Okay. So we can just maybe stop our discussion for the time being, because I am sure you'll have questions, doubts over this. We'll pick up this part in the next session, but it's very, very important for you to remember this flow, understand this flow, because a lot of things will automatically get linked to this. You will be able to understand this overall audit approach. So if you have any questions, any doubts around this flow, you can ask me. Okay. And of course, if you are done, then we are just closing our discussion for today. Of course, we'll have discussion around your questions, doubts, which will continue. But some of you, if you just want to leave, you can just feel free. But if you have any questions around this flow, please let me know.
Yes, sir.
Just a minute. So I think Pranav has a question. Pranav is saying, sir, how will the materiality affect the efficiency of audit? See, Pranav, I would say materiality is one area which we have not yet touched. Okay. So please park that for some time. Materiality will significantly impact the entire audit process. Okay. And particularly in relation to this substantive testing, analytical procedures, this materiality plays a very, very important part. But that is something you can just say we are going to cover later. Okay. Then I think this, any questions if you have around the flow? No?
Yes,
Sure.
sir,
Are you clear on the, sorry. Yes. Hardik, you have a question around this flow?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Substantive testing and analytical testing both have to be done for in both the situation, both of these testings will be done, or only if the extent is higher, then both of them will be tested.
No, so generally both are done, but again that depends on the area to area. For example, say now this is something which the auditor needs to plan, and this is something which the auditor will plan on the basis of outcome of testing of control. For example, say if the controls are very strong and PPE is not a very large number in the financial statements, so auditor may decide that I'll perform maybe only checking of 1 or 2 samples as far as testing of detail is concerned, and I'll do more of analytical procedures on PP. But inventory he finds to be quite critical. So he'll say, okay, I'll spend significant time on inventory by doing substantive testing of inventory. Of course, he'll also do analytical procedures on inventory, but extent of substantive testing he'll want to keep more. Okay. So now this will depend again area to area. Again, that will be dependent on the outcome of testing of internal control. And in some of the cases, he may choose to do only analytical. In some of the cases, he may choose to do only substantive. In some of the cases, he may choose to do both. Okay, so that is something which is going to be the planning part. So he'll have to decide on an area by area basis.
Sir, so this means that the set of procedures which the auditor will put, he can put any set of procedure in any of the situation as on the basis of internal controls. which he has tested.
Yes.
Okay, sir.
But
Thank you.
of course, the extent of testing
Yes, sir.
will go down or increase depending on the outcome of testing of control.
Okay, sir.
Okay, then I think this question comes from Mohammed. I think as around the flow, it seems you're clear. Okay, great. Mohammed is asking, sir, can you please explain me the narrative record once more due to some network issue? No problem. So narrative, very simple, huh, Mohammed. See, when you obtain the description, okay, so you go meet the client, you discuss in detail. It's a complete description. So entire description you are put down. You are taking a record of that. That is what you call as narrative record. Okay. So in an elaborate manner, you have discussed everything. You have just noted down. That is what you call as narrative. And I think similar question came from someone else also, but I'm just hoping this is clear. So Bhavna is asking meaning of substantive testing of detail. See, meaning, what do you do in this substantive testing? This is a full-blown detailed concept which you are going to discuss in greater detail. As of now, you can just simply say that substantive testing is all about testing of details. For example, when you check depreciation, that is nothing but a testing of detail. For example, when you check invoices, say for example, in relation to sales promotion expenses, that is what you do as testing of detail. That is what is substantive testing. Okay. Pallavi is asking, sir, sorry, I think Pallavi has a question. Let me just go through this. She's asking, auditor first evaluate internal control, then test it. What is the difference between these two? See, evaluation was all about understanding, assessing that. Testing is by checking, by going through the documents. Okay, or maybe I would say let's wait for this next session because we have not discussed that in case of testing, what is it that the auditor will do? Testing will just simply say he'll now check. So once, let's suppose you obtain the understanding, if you are asked to check, so testing is that stage when he'll go check the records on a sample basis to ensure that something which he has understood is now operating in an effective manner or not. Yes, I understand you have some more questions.
सर वॉक थ्रू के अंदर अगर कंप्लीट अंडरस्टैंडिंग, अगर ऑडिटर को लगता है हाँ मैंने पूरी की पूरी अंडरस्टैंडिंग कर ली, लेकिन उसने रियल में कोई भी अंडरस्टैंडिंग नहीं की और वो टेस्टिंग के ऊपर आ जाता है, तो फिर क्या होगा?
Then his testing will not be appropriate. He'll not be able to test. So let's suppose if you don't know something, how can you check that? So tell me, if you don't understand anything, will you be able to go check that?
No, sir, but
No.
sir, something और कुछ पता होगी इसके अंदर क्या
See,
चल रहा है?
half knowledge is dangerous. Huh? So if you only know kuch
Yes,
and you
sir.
go start checking that, so what will happen? You will put across maybe
Yes.
inappropriate questions to the
Yes.
client, or you will not be able to check everything. Yeah, or maybe you will be checking something inaccurately. Yeah,
Yes, sir.
so that is not something which the auditor is supposed to do. Auditor is someone who is supposed to be a professional, okay, who is supposed to be having thorough knowledge, skill set, and that skill set can only be demonstrated once he is following all of these procedures in an appropriate manner. So if he will not do his work in a diligent manner, what will happen? The quality of his work will go down. As simple as that.
Yes, sir.
Then I think this question comes from Sandhya. I think she is asking, so showing through bank statements, it is 80,000 payment salary, but the management said to employee, bring 20,000 by cash next day to hand over to him. See, these are all fraudulent activities. Huh? These are all fraudulent activities. If you come across all of these things, so what will happen? Automatically, so you'll say that the controls are not strong, something that we just discussed. And as an auditor, you will have to become more alert. You will have to increase your extent of testing. Why? Because your comfort level will go down. Okay, so that is going to be the outcome of this. And that's how you will deal with these matters. Okay, So there's no immediate reporting you'll do. That's how you'll deal with all of these matters. And that is exactly what is required to be done in case of audit. Okay. All right. Any more questions on this?
Sir,
Yes.
sir, in internal control questionnaire, it is possible that the employees fill wrong data which the auditor needs. And when auditor tests on himself those data, he feels a discomfort. Then that audit questionnaire can be used by him as an audit evidence.
So in such a case, you are absolutely right. Many a times this may happen. Maybe the employee didn't give much seriousness to that document, or he didn't have much time, and he just filled yes, no, and that was incorrect. On the basis of which, when the auditor get on to the testing, see, I would say generally auditor will not do that, because the auditor will also go through the questionnaire and he'll just make sure that whatever is understood is correct. Okay, and that's why we have this walkthrough in place. If let's suppose auditor just gets onto the control testing, and over there he finds that whatever he has understood, maybe with the help of the questionnaire, is not matching with the results of the test, then what will happen? He'll go to the client again, he'll ask questions that why are the things coming out in a different manner as against something which you have explained. Okay, whether the explanation is written or verbal. So what will happen? Client will have to correct that. So client will have to change his understanding. Okay. So
Okay,
client
sir.
will then explain, oh, I'm sorry, maybe I provided this wrong information. So then this entire questionnaire will have to be refilled. This will have to be documented again, which will have to be again analyzed by the auditor. He'll have to perform his testing all over again. So, okay. So this is how this is required to be dealt.
So, sir, a chance will be given to them again.
Sorry.
So, sir, a chance will be given to them again for refilling it.
So it's not about giving a chance. It's about making sure that the right set of information is obtained. So
Okay,
if
sir.
the client has not done that in a diligent manner, auditor will catch hold of it. And this is something which you will practically see quite a lot. In case of companies, this is quite common. So it keeps happening.
Okay,
Okay,
sir.
it keeps happening. So this is not something that you are giving a chance. So many a times this will happen. Okay, and you understand this will happen. And you'll have to plan your work accordingly. You'll have to plan your time accordingly.
Okay,
Okay,
sir.
so this is quite common. I'm saying this is not something unusual. You'll get to see this quite a lot practically. Yeah. All right. Any more questions? Any more doubts if you have? I think we are done. Then we can just close our discussion for today. Yeah. All right. Great. So thanks everyone for your time once again and for the wonderful participation you have shown once again. Thanks so much. And just please make sure that whatever we have discussed, and in today's topic in particular, because there are a lot of things we are going to cover which will be in continuation of what we have discussed today. Yeah, so that's why very important that you revise this when we meet next. Okay, so thanks so much.
Happy Navratri, sir.
Same to you. Thanks. I think, Nisarg, we can close this.